Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Dice Tower Daily Chat. I am your host for this evening, and I'm Mike. I guess I should put that, even though my name is right up there, I'll put it out there. And with me tonight, I have the honor of chatting with somebody that I've chatted with a number of times before, and I always enjoy our chats. And so I'm looking forward to tonight's. I have Frank West of the City of Games. Welcome, Frank.
Hey, Mike. It's great to be here, and it's good to talk to you again and get to chat about some games. So I hope you're doing well.
Yeah, I mean, doing as well as can be expected under the trying times that we're dealing with. But the daily chat is a great time at the end of for me, it's the end of the day. For you, you're already into the next day, right?
I'm well past yesterday. I mean, I don't know what you guys are doing back there, but it's great. It's nice sunny day out here now, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm going to start getting a reputation here because I think I'd have to check, but I want to say if not the majority, a huge number of the guests that I've had on have been either from the UK or other parts of Europe. And I feel awful because it's so late/early there. But luckily, I have a bunch of friends over there that are night owls. I mean, you said that this is the time of day that you are like at your best.
Yeah, it's one of those funny things for me because obviously as you grow up, and I have to, as much as I hate to admit it, obviously I'm an adult these days. I'm a fully grown man. I'm in my mid-30s now, technically speaking, and
sure,
I still kind of live like a child where I just like to be up at night. I don't like to get up in the morning. I was saying to Sarah, my partner, the other day, what are we ever going to do if we have kids? Because I'm not getting up before 10 o'clock in the morning ever. You can do that. I'll raise them to be night people like me because I've never changed. I've never developed that get up early and get going. Much prefer the evening.
Yeah. I used to be. I'm not gonna tell you that all of your illusions will be shattered, Frank. But I used to be the same way. I used to be a night owl, and now I was just telling you before we started, and I've mentioned, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 times that I wish the daily chat started at 8 p.m. my time rather than 9 because at this point my brain is already dulled even beyond it was where it was before. Now, I don't want to make any assumptions, although you are well established in the board gaming hobby. For anybody who maybe is not familiar with who you are and what you do, Frank, why don't we take a minute or two or 3 or 4 or however long you like, quite honestly, to let people know what you do and what the City of Games is all about.
No, completely. And, I'm always the first to assume that no one has any idea who I am because I still very much see myself as a small designer and a small publisher. So for anyone who doesn't know me, I design board games and I publish board games. I released my first game through Kickstarter back in 2017, which was The City of Kings. Since then, I did Vidoran Gardens and most recently The Isle of Cats, which has probably become the game that more people have become aware of. I mean, The City of Kings got big, but The Isle of Cats is obviously the very recent game that's kind of out in front of people. But really, I spend my days kind of finding a balance between publishing games, designing games, and also kind of just chatting with people who want to learn to design games and want to publish games. There's a number of people who I have regular calls with and chats with, just trying to help them kind of get into the industry because I really enjoy that side of it as well, and just getting to kind of share knowledge and kind of help people. And, if there's anyone here tonight and they've got questions, then you're welcome to ask them about that because I really enjoy just giving back. This is such a big community-based industry, and so much of my success has been because of the community around me and what I've learned and been given. So I just enjoy giving back to that as I kind of progress with my own kind of projects as well.
Has this mentorship kind of come about because you've sought it out, or have people come to you and you've just been like, boy, this is something that I get enjoyment out of? So in other words, do you think you've kind of initiated this, or has it happened almost accidentally by people reaching out to you asking questions?
I think it's very much a bit of both. I love to find out what people are doing. And there's nothing I find more exciting than talking to someone who maybe is the first time they're designing a game, or they've designed a game and they want to kind of get out there and just learning and discussing it with them. And For example, I had someone just before the lockdown who I met at Essen, and we kind of were saying, he lived just down the road from me in Wales, which is another country, but it's just
Sure.
just around the corner for us guys. And he was kind of had a game and it had been on Kickstarter and it had unfortunately failed. And I said, I'm happy to go and chat and let's meet up. And he came over and we met in a Starbucks, and we ended up spending like 6 hours in this
Wow.
Starbucks going through his Kickstarter page, his game, and everything. So I think that in that situation, he connected with me because he was happy to get some answers, but I kind of ended up turning it into an all-day thing as opposed to 20 minutes because I just enjoyed it so much. And there's a gentleman who's going to be releasing a game in a couple of months, and I won't kind of say what it is because I don't want to use this to advertise that, but I've been working with him now for 3 years, 4 years. I've given him like a space in my office to come and work on his game, and it's so exciting now to see that's going to be releasing. And for me, I'm just as excited about that coming out as I have been my own projects because I feel so invested in it. So I do just enjoy nursing those kind of things to kind of make them happen.
Yeah, that's awesome. And speaking of awesome, we've got a lot of awesome people in our chat. I'm seeing a lot of regular favorites and some names that are newer to me. So welcome everybody. We're glad you're here, and I will be scrolling through here. And Frank, obviously, if you see a particular question, if you're seeing them that strikes your fancy, let me know. But I see Dead Squirrel here and Sarah Chapman, Fatal Paper Cut, Nick Wagner, lots of people, and it's lovely to see you here. So already we have somebody, a Fatal Paper Cut, who loves your games, Frank. Love your games, Frank.
Well, thank you very much.
They're not the only one. I have made my affection for both City of Kings and Isle of Cats quite clear. I haven't played Vodoran Gardens yet. I really need to. I haven't avoided it. I just haven't played it yet. So I'll give that a shot, Frank, for sure.
Vodoran Gardens doesn't have a solo mode at the moment, and obviously, whilst I know you play other games as well,
I do. Yeah,
it's one of those games where I like to sit and think about how I would design a solo mode for it, and I do one day really hope to release a solo mode for it as a kind of just some online rules that people can download or something. But it's just finding the right time to kind of do that and kind of get it out there. So maybe then I'll give you a call and let you know. So
let me know. Let me know. I'll be happy to play test or whatever else you need. Dead Squirrel says, I have to admit, the Isle of Cats was the absolute biggest surprise for me. I hesitantly bought it primarily solo play and absolutely loved it. Now I want to try City of Kings. Now, I bring this up because A, it's, I'm sure it's nice to hear, but B, I've heard similar statements to this a lot of times that people, have you found this, that people were maybe hesitant to try Isle of Cats for a number of either thematically, maybe they weren't sure it was for them, or they're like, oh, here's another Polyomino game. Have you heard about this kind of initial resistance and then they're just won over by it? Or
for sure. It's one of those funny things, and I really want to start this answer with kind of a massive disclaimer in big bold print. And anyone who clips this out, I'm going to shout at you on the internet because it's really important this disclaimer's kept in, which is the Isle of Cats Kickstarter was fantastic. And I was so over the moon with how it went. But with that said, when I look back at the first 24 hours of the project when it went live, there was a lot of failure in my eyes. There was a lot of missed potential and a lot of problems. And of course, it still did amazingly well, but I saw all of these issues, and they were things that I was aware of, but I don't feel like I had addressed them in the right way. And over the first kind of 48 hours of the campaign, I actually started making a lot of changes to the Kickstarter page because of that. And fundamentally, they came down to two things. Number one is that the majority of people assume that a cat game is going to be kind of a party game, a city game. Like cats they're notorious for being that they're not really a game, they're just the thing people use when they don't want to design a game. And one of my goals in designing the Isle of Cats was I want to create the gamer's game for cats. So obviously there was kind of this perception that it was going to be something that it wasn't. And then the second side to that was polyomino games, which are these like Tetrisy type pieces that the Isle of Cats uses. That a lot of people, have seen them with games like Patchwork, where they're much smaller games, they're 20-minute games, they're lighter games. And again, one of my goals was to create a more medium weight, more complex game. But if you take that kind of understanding of polyomino games and that misunderstanding of cat games, there was a huge perception, as you've kind of just said in the chat, of this isn't really for me. This is a city game or kind of a light quick game. And there was a lot of messaging and a lot of teaching that needs to be done, that actually this is a game for everyone. This is a serious game. This is kind of a much bigger game than you imagine. And even now, like, I'm still finding more and more people are now going back because they were put off at the start, but now they've kind of discovered that's kind of what's behind the box, so to speak.
Sure. And it's interesting that this next comment here by Games of Fire is going to kind of dovetail to the next thing I wanted to bring up, kind of piggybacking on what you just said. Games of Fire says, I love the Isle of Cats. It got one of my daughters to dip her toe in the hobby. She used to avoid playing games. And I don't want to make assumptions for Games of Fire here, but that reminded me of you made the game one that was versatile, in that the core game is one that, like you said, is a medium weight game that, can be part of any gamer's quote unquote game night. But you also have that family mode attached to it that makes it so that you could have people that maybe are intimidated or not familiar with more modern game design, or younger people. And so what do you think the response has been to that, to having kind of the core game being more of a medium weight game and this family mode that you put in as well?
Yeah, it's one of those funny things, because for many years, games have had different modes of play. People have had like, you can cut this rule out and make it a bit simpler. You can do this and make it a bit different. But I really wanted to have this concept of there's two completely independent rule books, and one is really aimed at that kind of younger market and the inexperienced gamer market just as much as children. And then the other one being that kind of more the standard game that you kind of come to expect when you're a regular gamer. Sure. And I don't really feel that that's been approached quite as strongly as I did it in the Isle of Cats before. I'm sure there's the odd other game that has done it, but from my experience, it's not a common approach. And I took a lot of risk with that. There was a lot of people who kind of said to me, look, why are you putting two different games in one box? They share components, but there's also stuff they don't share. So why are you doing this? And I truly believe that I had designed a game where both of those modes stood strong for themselves. And I'm so pleased now that when I see reviews, when I see people talking in chats and stuff about the games, that just as much as the conversation is about the family mode as it is about the full mode. And that really excites me, because it's great to see that obviously both modes are working. But for me, I design games because I want people to enjoy games, and to know that you can enjoy it with that bigger range of people, that you can enjoy it with children, and kind of as they get older, you can progress them to a more complicated game. If you've got friends who are like less, they're less willing to experience a complex game, it gives you a good stepping stone. It's kind of a gateway within a gateway game, if that kind of makes sense. And I'm like, it's one of the things I'm most proud of with that game, is kind of how that's gone, and the reception to it's been amazing. So it's great to hear about Games of Fire and your daughters and people just playing it as a family.
Sarah Chapman. Hello, Sarah. Frank, can you tell us how you got into designing games? You actually started talking about it a little bit, but maybe if, as much detail as you'd like to.
Yeah, so for me, I'm always cautious to say this, but I was a massive video gamer. Board games weren't a thing in my life. And it's funny because the first time I did a podcast and someone asked me about this, I thought to myself, actually, board games have been a part of my life kind of in the background without me realizing, in their own kind of way. Like when I was 15 years old, I did a graphics project for one of my exams, and that graphics project was actually to design a board game. So when I was 15 years old, I actually spent 3 months working on a board game. But obviously I never really thought about that because I was so focused on video games, and I loved the idea of designing games. When I was at university, I designed an AI system for a real-time strategy game, and that was a year of my life. And it was always about just developing creativity and kind of how you create this stuff. And then there was a point in my life where I really discovered modern board games, and they started to tell me all those crazy things that you want to do in video games that are going to require 50 people or 100 people in these giant teams.
Right.
You can maybe do that on your own. You can maybe do that with one or two people, but it became a much more manageable thing. And I just fell in love. I fell in love with the idea of being able to create something without that kind of dependency of these huge teams of people. As coming from a programming background, like I was used to working with huge teams of people and the challenges that kind of incurs. So really for me, game design was something that I was born doing, but board game design was a transitional period where I discovered this amazing hobby and just realized that it was the answer to all my problems in a strange kind of way. I mean, it's introduced new problems to my life for sure.
Sure,
I'm sure. I've got 800 games in my house that apparently I have to organize and make clean shelves and things once in a while, but you know.
Coraloo, hello Coraloo. Did Frank get to name Isle of Cats, and did he purposely make it a homonym, for I love cats?
Yes, and yes. So, with like naming our games and like most of the stuff, you know, I'm very much a one-man company. My partner Sarah is hugely involved in helping what I do, and without her, I would never have gotten anywhere. Like the early days, she was so like critical to it. But things like kind of coming up with game names and stuff, it's really a conversation until something clicks. And the idea of this island of cats and then understanding that it meant I love cats just became a good kind of, well, that just works, right? But it's funny because a lot of people always say to me, why have you put the in the front of it? You know, why is it the Isle of Cats, and why doesn't it just Isle of Cats? And this was really for two things. One of them, it was partly branding because all of our other stuff to date had the kind of in the front of it. But the main one was that I actually found that when it was Isle of Cats, the I love cats just became too confusing. Too many people at playtest, too many people when they were talking about it were getting confused because you were just saying I love cats all the time, and they weren't associating it with Isle of Cats. And actually by putting the in front of it, it made it easier to say to people, even though a lot of people will kind of skip it in its own way. So it's this strange thing where it fixed the problem but also didn't fix the problem. But yeah, you know, this is the weird silly things that I spend hundreds of hours thinking about, which probably no man on earth should ever think about, but I do.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's really funny. I'm very much taking the possibility that I'm just dense, but I didn't catch the homonym. I mean, for quite a while, it just didn't even strike to me until someone brought it up, and then I'm like, oh. And then I got a real kick out of it because, you know, I was giving Tom a lot of grief about that because, you know, he quite enjoyed the game. And he makes a big show out of not being a cat person, and so I try to get him to say the name of the game as often as possible, just for my own enjoyment. This
weird saying I was convinced that I was going to drive it into all of my marketing, and Sarah always used to say to me, "Don't do this. Like people are going to give you that look where you're not being funny." But the whole concept was kind of going along the lines of, do you love cats? I love cats. How about the I love cats board game? And kind of just really stringing out this kind of phrase too much. And, you know, I was going to use it at conventions. I was going to use it at shops and just really push it. But, you know, the jury said don't do it. So I had to hold it back and let people discover it for themselves, like yourself, where a few months later, but you get there.
I get there eventually. Goofy Spielt says, looking forward to Skella Game publishing the German version of Isle of Cats. And so I'm not going to, this is the first thing that my mind goes to. I'm not saying it's yours, Frank, at all. But does this mean that right now Isle of Cats would not be eligible for a Spiel Award? Would this mean that potentially next year it would be in the running? Okay.
So we would not have been allowed to be, well, my understanding, I mean, don't get me wrong, this is something which until very recently I had never had any reason to look into or understand, and turns out a lot of the documentation is in German, and obviously I'm not necessarily a German speaker, so
Sure.
but my understanding is that basically towards the end of this year, around Christmas, is when you kind of can start submitting games for the following year. But effectively, the requirement is that the game has to have been in retail in Germany, in German, for it to be able to be submitted. And obviously, as we already know, the nominations for this year are out, and the game isn't even out in German yet, then it would fall into next year. And this is why we find all these weird things where, you know, often you'll see a game that is nominated that is, you kind of think, well, that came out 2 years ago. Or you have games like The Crew where, you know, they've been out in Germany for a long time, but they haven't really been out in kind of the English-speaking markets for very long. And it's a weird thing because we all live in our own world, you know, our own language. And one of the things I always kind of think to myself about is, you know, many of us are going to be familiar with Board Game Geek, a website we go to every single day or, you know, once a week to look at board games. And we all sit there and we kind of say, oh, there's Gloomhaven, you know, it's #1 on Board Game Geek. You know, here's Pandemic and here's Terraforming Mars and so on. And I sit there and I think, do Russian speakers use Board Game Geek as their core website? Like, is this actually the #1 game in the world, or is it the #1 game in the English-speaking language? You know, because we're now translating to 12 languages. We've got Chinese and Japanese and Russian, Ukrainian. I kind of think, well, those are very different languages to English. So, and as I've spoken to people, I've discovered some of these countries do, or these languages do have their own equivalents, and they do have their own kind of gaming league. So it's a very... The more I kind of am looking into this language side of things, the more I'm realizing how much of a bubble many of us are living in and how much we're not aware of these other kind of things that exist out there.
And I guess I just, that made me wonder about, you know, in Isle of Cats specific, well, shoot, you could say the same thing about City of Kings. There's a fair amount of text on some of the cards. Now, obviously, the basket cards, they're not going to, that's pretty language independent, but the lesson cards and things along those lines in Isle of Cats are going to have, you know, some pretty specific language for scoring, for scoring purposes. And so I wonder how challenging it is to make sure that you are getting it translated in such a way that the intent of your scoring scenarios are being translated. And I'm sure it works the other way around. I'm sure that this has been an issue going from German to English for years, or Taiwanese to English for years, or whatever the case may be. How involved have you had to be in the translation process and maybe making sure that those what is being written in that language is reflective of what you wanted it to be?
It's really fascinating because I think that different publishers would approach this differently. So for me, for example, I have a very strict rule that any product or, you know, game, expansion, accessory, anything which is released to do with my games needs to be of equal quality. So when Skellig released a German version, or, you know, Lucky Duck released a French version and so on, they need to maintain 100% quality. And to achieve this, I manage all of the sign-offs, I manage all of the production runs, I do everything. So I send them the files, they translate them, they send them back to me, I then do tweaks and graphic designs and adjustments and stuff, and it's very much a hands-on process. And of course I can't check the wording itself,
right,
but in regards to just making sure the overall quality and everything is there, like, it's very hands-on. Then in regards to the specifics, each and every one of them comes back to me and has questions. A prime example of this is the different cats in the game have different race names, you know. So the Oshaks is the white kind of magical cat, and, you know, our Ukrainian partner came back to us and it's like, well, how do we translate Oshaks into Ukrainian? And I was like, I don't know, you tell me.
Right.
And those kind of challenges are quite hard because you might think, oh, it's just a name, just change it to anything. But as soon as you start changing these things too much, the story and the narrative can start to get broken. And a good example of that is the treasures. So we've got common treasures and rare treasures in the game. And that's kind of, for an English-speaking person, you can very much look at it and go, well, common means I'm probably going to get it more often, and rare means it's going to be harder to get. But when you translate those into other languages, those sub-meanings don't necessarily stay. So one of them, for example, had to translate it to basically the gold and the bronze, because that was the only way to maintain the one has more value than the other. But that change in itself doesn't necessarily still suggest that one's more common than the other. So that was one of those subtle things where for me it was like, well, is that going to impact the gameplay? Is that going to start messing with lessons? Are people going to start to assume that because they're no longer like named through rarity, that they're not going to have different rarities to them? So you certainly get some weird like complications that come in that you do have to chat through.
Yeah, I hadn't considered that before, so it was interesting that was brought up. Jerry D asks, what games impacted you as a kid, and what was your turning point game that got you into board games?
Wow, okay. I mean, as a child, I played through all of the consoles originally. So, you know, the games that come to memory for me are like the original Marios, the original Sonics. As strange as it is probably to say, Pong was a game that I did play, and also Paperboy. And I don't see myself as being that old, but those were games that I definitely did play as a kid. I think they must have been someone else's old versions from the attic. You know, they definitely weren't brand new. And then things like GoldenEye and kind of Perfect Dark for Nintendo 64, and then the big games that really started to pull me in was the Final Fantasy series, Final Fantasy 7, Final Fantasy 8. Then I started getting onto the PC games, and I got very heavily invested into Blizzard games, so Diablo, StarCraft, Warcraft, and then World of Warcraft. I'm one of these people that has spent at least 3% of my life playing World of Warcraft, so
You've actually computed that? You've figured out the actual time?
If I log into my main character, because I have multiple characters, you can type in a command that says is /played, and it tells you how long you've spent logged in as that character. And my main character is on about 350 days of play. Oh, man. So I've spent an entire year playing the game as that character, and honestly, I don't regret a single part of it. You know,
that's what's important.
So many friends, I learned so much, and you know, that was the biggest inspiration for the City of Kings and everything I've done since, and those kind of fantasy worlds. So it's very much, it was research, right? You know, I can put it down to research. So it wasn't gaming, it was just research. But yeah, so those were the kind of the games that kind of brought me up. And then the first modern, I don't want to say board game, was Magic the Gathering. I played Magic the Gathering for many years as I grew up, and you know, tabletop game, I guess. And then like, I don't know the first modern board game specifically, because I just remember getting so obsessed with them so quickly and playing so many. I know every time we did board game nights that it ended with Werewolf, and we were huge fans of Werewolf back then, and we kind of had a good group of about 20 people, so we would all split off and play games, and then we'd come back together and do that at the end of the night. So that was the one that reminds me. But you know, there's so many games that we did play back then, I can't really think of the first one specifically.
Nick Wagner asks, and this sounds like a very Nick Wagner question, are the cats in Isle of Cats compatible with some of the Uwe Rosenberg games like Cottage Garden or Spring Meadow?
So you like, one of the things that people will learn about me, hopefully, in years to come as they get to know me more, is that I obsess over every single detail in every single possible way.
You have an actual answer for this question, don't you?
I do. Because hand on heart, when I first started working on the Isle of Cats, one of the first things I did was I got every single polyomino game I owned, which was a large number, took one piece out from each, and got a ruler and measured what size a square was in a polyomino to see if there was a standard size people were using, and to see whether they felt too small, if they felt too big, what was the most pleasing size to hold in your hand, and then how that felt through. So the, whilst these days I don't remember the exact measurements, there are certainly a couple of games out there where the squares are exactly the same size as.
Oh, uh-oh. We may. Oh, here we go. You're back.
Oh,
I lost
cool.
you there for a second.
No worries.
But I was just getting ready to say that is one example out of countless to explain why I am not a game designer nor ever could be, because there's no way I would. My brain doesn't work like that. Here we have another extremely. This may be a serious question. I don't want to make assumptions. Winged bull or winged bull. I'm not sure if it's winged or winged, Frank. I'm not sure if that's a stylistic thing or if there's a correct pronunciation.
I'm leaving you with that one.
Will the Isle of Dogs be the sequel? I don't know if this is a joke or serious, but
this question comes up a lot. You might believe that or not.
Yeah, no, I do believe that.
I mean, I never knew this when I made this game, but it turns out there's a few people that like dogs as well. I mean, I quite like cats. Cats are a big part of my life, but apparently there's one or two dog lovers out there. So
a couple, yeah.
have certainly heard a few people say it. Like at the moment, I certainly don't have any intentions. Many people will, and never say never, but many people will do kind of reskins of games, rethemes of games, and so on. For me, my passion is creating new experiences and trying to do something very different. If you've seen The City of Kings, if you've seen Fedoran Gardens, if you've seen The Art of Cats, they all have me at their heart. They all have these very puzzly games. They're all set in the same universe, but the games themselves are so different. And I don't really have any desires to just release another game that's the same as one that I've already done. The new game I'm working at the moment, again, is just, it's another corner of the square, and
right.
So, someone might come along one day and go, I own the rights to Art of Dogs, let's do this. And it will be a discussion. But to be honest, one of the things that I love the most about what I do is the independence, the fact that I'm very much a one-man person. If you fill in a replacement request on my website, it comes to me. My phone will beep. If you message on Twitter, Facebook, if you post on something, you've got a question, if you go to our shop and buy something, everything comes to me. I check it all, and I never want to grow to lots of people. I enjoy the single kind of approach. I know how much I can manage in a day. I know what I can do. So things like, let's do Art of Dogs. That means that for the next year, I'm not going to release any other games. Right. It means I'm not going to do anything else because I don't have the bandwidth to support more than one game every 12 to 18 months. And that obviously plays a big part. So yeah, regardless of whether it was a joke question or not, there's a very serious, boring answer to it.
No, it was good. The new game that you've teased, is this? I'm assuming Vesh will be a part of this new game. I'm assuming Vesh will be making an appearance. Unfortunately, that horrible Vesh.
It's interesting. So one of the things, and again, I like my disclaimers at the start of sentences on live streams, that the world has changed a lot recently. COVID-19 has had a massive impact on my timelines and plans. So I'm currently thinking of bringing a different game out first, and that was because, for a number of reasons. So that different game is the one which I'm kind of talking about at the moment, and it might change. In 6 months' time, more stuff might happen, more things might change, and that might switch around again. But the basic principle behind this game is that it's set some years later, and basically the Ockle, which is kind of the penguin warrior-like race in the City of Kings universe, their home was destroyed by Vesh. Everything was killed. Whilst we saved the cats, no one cared about the penguins. They were just left over.
Outrageous. All right.
So it's this weird kind of civilization building like game where basically you play the Ockle, you've just explored this new island and you're building your new city and you're building up a home. So Vesh is in it in that he's kind of gone, and it's kind of the after, and it's the kind of the recovery phase of the world where people are starting to kind of grow and kind of rebuild their civilizations.
Interesting.
Because who doesn't want to do a penguin-based civilization building game, right?
You can sign me up already. I want to say that when you were on my podcast with Dan, that you were talking about maybe going in the civilization game direction. So I'm excited that you still are interested in going that way. Dan Cheston says, "Hello, Frank. I'm that guy that already had Patchwork and Barren Park, but finally caved and pledged for Cats to have a 1 to 6 player poly game. Dude, Cats is amazing. So glad I made the plunge." Again, I'm not putting this up here just to keep blowing smoke, at you.
Honestly, we've got all night for this, all morning even. So just anyone who wants to say something nice, this is the best time to do it.
It's always nice, but I brought this up because Dan here mentioned this player count, and that's something I think that also maybe sets it apart a bit. Did you have in mind from the get-go that this was going to have that type of a wide player count? It's not always easy to do because, you have to keep in mind downtime in a lot of games, and you have to keep in mind how it's going to affect the length of the game. And so was this something that was there at the beginning of development, or did it progress throughout the development stage?
It's funny, really. When I started designing the City of Kings was a game that I designed for me, for my passion. I never intended to turn this into a business. It was just something I was doing that naturally evolved. And Verdoran Gardens, the second game, was a game where it was just an idea that I had that very quickly came together, and there was never any kind of thought in, do I want to release this game or not? It was a very quick, easy process to do. It was very cheap comparatively to the City of Kings, and it was it was obviously tested and went through all of the chains, but it just didn't have that years of time. And then when I sat down for my next game, I had this weird moment, and I don't like to do this very often because I like to see myself as someone who kind of does what they enjoy. But I kind of sat down and I thought, what would a proper business do? What would someone who actually has a clue do? And I kind of thought, well, the key things for me, it's got to be family accessible. It's got to have a solo mode. It's got to support multiple players, and that. So I kind of tick those boxes where 1 player, 6 player, or 5 or 6. I wasn't sure at the time. Family mode, and then kind of hardcore gamer. So they were very much 4 criteria that I set myself at the beginning. And whilst I didn't want to let them steer the game too much, it was very much if I add this to the game, how's it going to impact that? If I do this, how's it going to impact it? Right. So yeah, it was something there at the start, but it wasn't like the reason I did it, if that makes sense. It was more of it'd probably be good. And obviously the response to the Isle of Cats and that broad kind of range has made it very appealing, and it's made it very successful because every group, no matter who you are, if you're a new gamer, if you're an experienced gamer, if you've got a big group, if you're just one person on your own, you can pick it up and you can enjoy the game and have a full game experience, which I think is a very powerful thing to have from one game.
Absolutely. I'm putting Sarah's question up here because we already answered it, but she said, are you working on any new games? So we talked about that, but Sarah also early mentioned, I believe it was Sarah who was talking about how much she enjoys playing against her sister in the solo mode, and I already I'm well known as a lover of solo games, and I have already done a review for the solo mode of Isle of Cats, and I think it's fantastic. But the thing that's so interesting to me about that is it's not quite like any other solo variant that I've played before, in that you're playing against an opponent. Right, it's a clear opponent, but it's all on your board. That's what to me is kind of the game changer. Is that I've never played a game like that before, where you have one player board and you're trying to maximize your score, but at the very same time, in the same player space, in the same physical space, you're having to account for your opponent. And you're getting fed information every round, so you're being drip fed information, and so there's even a little push your luck involved in it, although that's not the main mechanism. It's just, and we talked quite a while ago when it was still prototype, and I was fascinated by it then. So I know that this is something that was a part of the development from probably the earliest stages, I would imagine. How did that come to you, where it was you weren't going to have 2 boards? You're going to be playing on the same, because to me that's almost a game changer.
It's funny because, again, with the 4 tick boxes I was talking about in the last question, this is where it really comes in, because when I designed the Isle of Cats, each mode, each process, the family mode, the standard game, and the solo mode, and the 5 and 6 players was considered at every step. And they weren't designed as add-ons afterwards. They weren't afterthoughts. They were very much the driving forces of these are the objectives I, as a publisher, want to hit. So with the Isle of Cats, with the solo mode, it was really, how do I design a solo mode that is a true solo mode that's been designed for solo gamers? And in my eyes, that includes things like quick setup time. You don't want to have a huge amount of overhead managing other players. You want to have a simulated experience of playing with other players. And these were all things that was kind of going through my head. And I won't lie, I sat there and I kind of thought to myself, how am I ever going to do this? And my immediate go-to was, let's create a Ultima, a kind of an AI-driven thing where it's putting tiles onto a board and kind of and then I thought to myself, how on earth am I ever going to create a system that can smartly put polyomino pieces onto a player board in a competitive way without being a massive headache? And it then dawned on me that that's not the right approach. That's the first approach you go to. But for me at least, when I was designing the solo mode, I thought to myself, okay, I'm a programmer. Let's tackle this like a programmer. When you program stuff, you have modules, you have functions, and these are all designs on kind of the inputs and the outputs. So if you've got a login system, the input would allow someone to enter a username and a password, and the output would be whether or not they successfully logged in or whether they didn't log in. The actual code in the middle, you don't care about at this point. You care about what goes in and what comes out. So I sat there and thought to myself, in a multiplayer experience, what are the inputs and the outputs that you as a player put on other players? You don't care about what they do in that middle bit. You care about whether someone takes the cat tile you want. You don't care where they put it on their boat. It doesn't matter to you where they put it on their boat. You might if you're trying to work out their score and stuff, but you're not thinking about it in that sense. Whenever they do something in the game, you think about, how does it impact me? And when I kind of sat down and thought about it like this, it really quickly hit me that actually we don't need them to have a boat, because we don't care. No one on earth is going to sit there and go, I want them to be doing this, because it's just going to be a headache, a hassle, it's going to make it harder. So it became this naturally intuitive thing of, well, if they don't have a boat, they still need to score. They still need to find a way to get points, which is where it kind of transitioned to, well, how about if it's my boat? And this concept of the sister trying to take your credit and kind of, it just kind of naturally evolved from there. And it took many months. It was not a quick process, but I'm so happy with how it turned out, because, as you say, I do feel like it's a very unique way of approaching solo modes, and it's something I want to continue to explore as I kind of design new games.
That's awesome. Fred Perro has a question, and I think that many of us have, Frank. Frank, will you be making more cat shapes so maybe one day I can fill my boat? Can we have a 15 block cat? Maybe that fills those spots that we never can seem to get.
I think that from the kind of the numbers I've seen, I think that about 1 in 500 people fill their boat.
Wow.
So if you play 500 times, you're going to fill your boat. That's kind of the stat which I generally see kind of from the numbers that I've kind of collected. Of course, it's nearly impossible for me to know truly what that number is, because tens of thousands of people have played the game now, and not everyone's told me. But if you want to tell me, then feel free. But it's certainly hard. At the moment, I don't necessarily have plans to just add more cats which are as the other cats, but I certainly have plans for expansions that are going to introduce some hopefully unexpected things and some kind of different shaped pieces, and to try and keep the same game but just maybe switch a few things around a bit. But it's not dogs. If anyone's going to ask, it's not dogs.
I'm gonna try my best with the name here. I more than likely will not do very well. Mathmatoran-aru? I hope. Is there a plan, because you were talking about what direction this might go, is there a plan to make either a team competitive version or a full-on co-op version?
For the Isle of Cats, I presume.
I'm presuming, yeah.
Not currently. So I It sounds stupid saying this, given all of the things I've just been saying, but I'm not a fan of games having lots of different modes. And I know saying that there's the big
Right.
player count, the family mode, the standard mode, the solo mode, but I don't really see them as kind of different modes as such. I see them
Right.
as different games. They're different games that use the same system in a different way. And for me, the kind of where you start introducing the concept of teams or cooperative and those kind of things, they feel like they're too much trying to make one game work differently but the same, but not at a different audience, not for a different purpose. It becomes a mode as opposed to a new group of people. So it's not really, it's a messy answer, but it's not really something that I want to explore too much at this point. I don't want to further dilute the options and possibilities of what you can do. That would have been the better answer, wouldn't it? I should have just said that at the start.
Look, no, you go where the muse takes you, Frank. E. Young asks, Frank, do you plan to keep all your future games in the same kitty? See, I've got cats on the brain,
all
Frank.
Of them.
City of Kings universe.
You should see how big my cat is right now. It's huge. It meows and meeples fall out. It's, but so. Yes and no. For the time being, yes. I really enjoy, like, since before I started designing the City of Kings, the first game, this idea of everything being in a shared universe has always very much appealed to me. I mentioned my love of kind of Blizzard games, and I truly love this concept of just exploring the same world in many ways. So many of us see a single story in a world. We see one point in time, and different games allow me to explore different time periods, different characters, the good guys, the bad guys. Are they bad guys, or do we just perceive them to be bad guys? What about, these crazy cat creatures? What's this? What's that? And I really like having that continuous world to kind of explore in. So for now, I find that it inspires me, even though I create it. Like it's this back and forth where everything kind of plays part. When I have an idea for a game mechanic, I quickly think about, how would that work in the universe,
Right.
And like a Civilization game. It's a great example, because if I said to you normally, I'm going to design a Civilization game, you're going to sit there and you're going to go, okay, well, they're going to go through the Bronze Age, they're going to go through this, they're going to go through that. It's going to be very kind of this. And if I say to you, well, let's create a fantasy, or a sci-fi Civilization game, you're going to think to yourself, well, where do we start?
Right.
We've now got to create this entire new structure, which makes it so much more complicated that just going back to what we know is easy. So for me, the idea of, I've got this fantasy world, I've got these races, we've got resources, we know some of the story of some of the things they've gone through. It gives me an unfair advantage to create that fantasy Civilization game, because I already have that starting point there. So it's a very helpful tool, as well as kind of a very nice creative outlet. So I don't see myself moving away from it, but at the same time, never say never. If someone wants to come along and says, do you want to make a new World of Warcraft board game, then I'm probably not going to say no, just because,
Right. Yeah, because you have that passion
Exactly.
for the IP. Cora Lou asks, Frank, please discuss some of the challenges with the design, for example, for the colorblind. Also, would you ever do a Braille version?
Yeah, it's really funny, because these are all things that my naive self, when I first started into this journey, wasn't really aware of. I didn't know about these things. And as I started releasing games, and even with the City of Kings, I was very much made aware of kind of the issues that colorblind people have, for example, and started thinking about that. For the Isle of Cats, it was very much from day one. It had to be included. It had to be a fix for it. And that was really hard. If I say to you, let's create a really colorful, beautiful game that's 100% dependent on the colors, and I don't want to have iconography, I don't want to have all this complexity, it's very, very difficult. So finding a way to introduce iconography into the artwork, so with the Isle of Cats, what we did was each of the 5 different cats' tails were designed to be basically a different style, which means that they can be used as icons without being icons. It was a very smart decision, but a very hard decision to kind of get place for. And I think it's such an important part of what we do, though, that it's worth the effort. It's worth testing. That was something that I spent a lot of time just sending to colorblind people and saying, can you check these? Can you go through them? Can you tell me which ones have got feedback? Okay, we need to adjust the tails on these ones slightly to kind of match that. As for the Braille version, this is something that is it's hard because I would love to be able to support that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And so many people may or may not know that my mother trains dogs for the blind, or I think in America they're CNI dogs or something
Yes.
along that line.
Right.
So since I was a young child, I have grown up with having new dogs every year. I've been involved in training 30 dogs for blind people, and I'm very passionate about being able to help people in all kind of situations. But unfortunately, board game production is still such a niche thing. There's still
Right.
such small markets, and when you have, if you're a new publisher and you release a game, having 1,000 copies of a game is going to be your goal.
Right.
If you're a big publisher, 10,000 or 20,000 is possibly going to be your long-term goal, but we're not talking millions and millions. So then when you subdivide that down to people who Braille will be beneficial for, you're really talking about such a small amount of people that it can never become financially affordable.
Right.
And then you start looking like a horrible person because you're saying, well, I'm not going to support these people because of money, and you have to find
Sure.
these balances. So a great example of this is Rodney Smith from Watch It Played has started doing the ASL, so the American
Right.
Sign Language videos, and I was having a conversation with him in the last week or so. I don't know if I'm allowed to make this public or not, but he's now going to be working on doing a ASL version of the Art of Cats video.
Oh,
so he's
awesome.
going to be releasing, it's possibly going to be a good few months down the road, but a sign language rule set for the Art of Cats, which to me is fantastic. And we were talking about it and saying, well, the effort involved in this, the money involved in producing this, is it worth it? Is it something that's going to be good? And for me, the cost involved in that was small enough that I didn't care whether or not it was financially sensible, because it was a nice thing to do. It's a good thing to offer. But something like a Braille set is just such a substantial amount of money that it just, at my size, just isn't an affordable thing as much as I would like to be able to do it.
Sure. I mean, and that I guess to me brings up also another issue in that you and I'll kind of piggyback this in with a comment that Bonzoso21 says he hasn't played any of your games but thinks he'll like Isle of Cats and has respect for people that can do it all, like you and Ryan Lockett, as just a couple of examples. And so, if I understand, I believe Ryan Lockett has a similar situation where not only is he the designer of the game, but he's also the publisher. How do you think your division of labor is? Because you've already mentioned that you're pretty much a one-person, show here. How much of your time is spent, because you have to account for those financial things. You can't just be in your playground of creativity and creating these games without having the practical financial decisions be a part of it. I'm sure if you didn't have to, you would design games probably a little bit differently, where you didn't have to account for component counts or types or material costs or any of those things. So how much do you think your division of labor is? How much time do you spend on the business aspect of things versus the creative aspect of things?
I think, again, lots of people would answer this differently. For me, I have a really kind of interesting process, and it's one of the things that I can imagine many, many people in their jobs would just, love to be able to do. And so when I was a programmer, I would spend all day, every week, programming, meetings, phone calls, just doing everything all the time. Now I'm a designer and a publisher. What I try to do is I try to work on these cycles where I'll spend 3 or 4 months just focusing on designing a game. All the admin and stuff will happen around it, but the core focus is designing a game. Then I'll move on to kind of the play testing, and the blind play testing. Then I'll spend a few months focusing on the artwork and kind of the graphic design. Then I'll be spending a few months focusing on manufacturing, and then I'll spend a few months on kind of the marketing and the kind of logistics side of it. And then obviously supporting it, like with the Art of Cats, it released in mid-March, and I've spent the last couple of months, my primary goal has just been support, kind of marketing, talking about the game, kind of helping people with questions. And then what becomes exciting is then suddenly it's like, well, it's been like 8 months now since I worked full time on designing games because I've been doing these different things. So now it's when full time game design's kind of coming back. And I've obviously played around with things, but that kind
Sure.
of drive comes back in. So for me, I kind of split my time up in big chunks where it's like a few months doing this, a few months doing that, a few months doing that. And what's great about it is it means you never get bored. You're not doing manufacturing and logistics every single day of your life. You're not
Right.
doing support every single day of your life, or marketing or sales or design or artwork, or and despite how much you love them, it means that when you come back to them, you're like, okay, let's reflect on how I did this last time. Let's reflect on how I can do it now. Let's reflect on what kind of parts I want to really kind of push and explore. So I kind of split my time like that, and it makes my life such a joy because every kind of few months I'm just doing something different, and I never get too tied down to one side. And it means that, you know, with this kind of new game, the Civilization game, if I do end up spending 6 months on it, so be it. That's fine. It doesn't matter.
Right.
But it's really just about that constant switching of what I'm working on for me that keeps it going, more so than is this financially the right decision?
Right, right. Just really quickly, because we mentioned, you mentioned artwork a little bit, and we mentioned Ryan Lockett. Now, Ryan Lockett actually does his own illustrations, and you don't do yours. But how responsible do you feel like you are for the aesthetic of your games, even if you're not necessarily directly creating the artwork?
So I would say, and obviously not to discredit Miguel and Dragonisco, who have been my two kind of primary artists, but I would say kind of very, very much so responsible. Whilst I'm not the final illustrator in any means, I spend a huge amount of time at the beginning doing all of the research, the colors, the kind of the concepts. I do a lot of the concept drawings, a lot of sketching, a lot of planning. Every single piece that comes out is kind of pre-defined and designed by me in as much, and then I don't want to say they just take it and color it in, because obviously they do an incredible amount of work on it, but then even once the pieces are finished, they'll come back to me and I'll do a lot of modification on them. So and a great example as well is like the boxes. So for all three games, the boxes are entirely my concepts, my designs, my sketches, my kind of workings, which I can spend 3 or 4 weeks on them before anyone even touches them. But then obviously they go and help with their ideas and kind of get involved in it. So I probably spend too much time on the art side of it, considering I'm not an artist, but I enjoy that creative side just as much. And if it was up to me, all my games would be stickman and they would all be just like very basic drawings, but turns out most people want them to be a little bit nicer.
No, I want them to look good, Frank. So I would go away. I would go away from that. And speaking of art, we've got Ian O'Toole. Hey, Mike and Frank. Hey, Ian. If you've not seen, just to kind of wrap this part of it up, if you've not seen the cover for City of Kings, you need to go on Board Game Geek or Google that, because I love that cover. Dead Squirrel asks, just as I mentioned how the Isle of Cats surprised me, has there been a game recently that has surprised you with how much you enjoy it?
Yeah, so I mean, on the box, just as an example, between me and Miguel, we spent 12 weeks working on that box. We spent 6 weeks each on City of Kings box. It was a huge project, and that was me full time for 6 weeks as well as him. So I'm very, very proud of how that turned out. In regards to new games, obviously with the lockdown, because I'm still in lockdown here in England, I've not played too many. I've been streaming on Twitch. I stream a couple of nights a week, some games. But one thing that I've actually been doing for the first time in, I don't know, 5 or 10 years, is I've actually been playing some video games with Sarah, my partner. And we started playing a PlayStation 4 game, which is called Horizon Zero Dawn. And it was a game that I had never heard of, I had no experience of, and my goodness, did it blow us away. We got so sucked in. Within 7 days, we spent 90 hours playing it. Like, we got so sucked in. She was off work for a week, and I was like, I'm having a break because let's just do this, you know? And it was amazing. It was one of the most engaging stories, the most unique concepts that I've experienced for so long, and that has given me so many ideas for board game stuff now that I'm sorted for years. Like, if they let me make a board game of that game, then that's it. By City of Kings, I'm in there right now. So
Wow. Is it the world that has inspired you? Is it just kind of the backstory? What is it, the aesthetic? What is it about that game specifically that is
it's
inspiring you?
honestly, it's a combination of everything. I mean, the gameplay itself is great. Like, I very
Hmm.
much like the systems and the mechanics of the game, but the story, it's one of the first video games I've played where, and I've played many over the years,
Hmm.
where the game, I just wanted to know what was going to happen. It was like being in like a movie for this entire time, where we would periodically pause it. We'd run our character somewhere safe and we would just sit there for 10 minutes and be like, what's going on? Like, what's going to happen? Like, it'd be 2 o'clock in the morning. And for me, that's fine. And for Sarah, like, she's like, I'm going to bed. And I was like, we need to find out what's in this building. We need to
Hmm.
do this. And we'd be sat there for another 2 or 3 hours. The narrative behind that was so engaging, and it's, without kind of putting too much into it, it's basically set many years in the future where the world is entirely destroyed and there's all of these animals, but all of the animals are robots, and they behave like just living intelligent beings, but they're all
Hmm.
robots, and all of the humanoids are tribal. So you're kind of, you run around with a bow and arrow, and
Hmm.
it's kind of this harmony between you as this kind of tribal kind of person and all of these super futuristic creatures, and trying to think, like, understand, why is this the world? Why is
Right.
it like this? How has this happened? And that
Okay.
exploration is very, very unique and very
Hmm.
kind of, yeah, I loved it.
That's awesome. I'll have to. I don't have a PS4, but I'm intrigued. Uh, we're about out of time, Frank. But and
Yeah.
and somehow I feel like this can't be something that is good. Ian O'Toole asks, has Frank told the Essen Hotel story yet? Whenever there's something like that where it's like have they told this story? It's usually not a story you can tell. So I'm not sure if this is the case or not, but.
It is a story I would be happy and would love to share, but it's a good kind of 5 minutes plus long.
Okay.
And if I make it too quick, it will take away a lot of the interest of it. So
Got it.
I may have to spare you this time, unfortunately, but maybe next time.
Maybe next time. Well, it has been a joy. It's been lovely to talk to you, Frank. I always like having an excuse to talk to you. It's sometimes we have to find an excuse to do it, but I'm always glad that when we get a chance to, because this has been great. Thank you for coming on and being so generous with your time and with your answers.
No, it's my pleasure. It's been absolutely great to be here, and thank you to everyone who's obviously been asking questions and been here and been engaged with this kind of conversation. As I said earlier, if you ever do want to just get in touch, if you're designing a game, if you want questions about publishing your stuff, just drop me a message. You can find me through my website, thecityofkings.com. You can find my contact details on there, and always happy. And Mike, yeah, it's wonderful to talk to you as always. You're definitely, in my top 350 million Americans. Like, you're well up there,
Nice.
one of the
Woo!
high ones.
I'll take
So,
it.
and yeah, and it's been great. So thank you for having me on here.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks again for the chat, and thank you to the chat, and have a lovely evening, everybody. Good night.
Bye, guys.